Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing Metallica's 7th studio album, Reload. Now if you're new to my channel, I just want to remind you that I am reviewing all of Metallica's albums here on my channel, and there's a playlist that's going to be linked down in the description below, as well as annotated at the end of the video that you could check out that has all my Metallica reviews that I've done so far in it. And it's also going to have all the Metallica reviews I do in the future as part of this series in there as well, along with this video that I'm doing right now. I highly recommend you check out those reviews because I may even reference them here in this video. Particularly my review for Metallica's previous album, Load, considering that, Load and Reload kind of go hand in hand, so I'm going to be referencing that review a fair amount in this video, I'm almost certain of it. But yeah, with that said, let's start talking about Reload, Metallica's 7th album, which came out only a year after Load, or about a year after Load, and that was kind of surprising considering the gap between Metallica's previous two albums, the Black Album and Load, was fairly long. And typically when it comes to Metallica, especially in the modern day, they're not exactly known for putting out albums after albums in a rather short period of time. So kind of this year between albums was a rather short thing, and given the fact that this album's titled Reload as opposed to Load, and the album art is very similar, it has that same Metallica logo on it, the slightly new edited logo, you have to think that there's a connection between these two albums. And if you thought that, you'd be correct, not only in the sound of the albums, but in just when they were made. Now, originally, the songs from Load and Reload were supposed to be part of a double album, but instead Metallica thought that would be way too much material, so what they did was they recorded Load, and then immediately after that album was done, they went and recorded Reload, and then put that album. That explains the short amount of time between the releases, the similarities in their titles, and album artworks, and sounds, all that kind of stuff. It's because they were originally supposed to be released together as a double album. And if you remember my review for Load, and you should definitely check it out, like I said before, because I'm going to be referencing it, like I am right now, I said my biggest complaint with that album was the fact that it was just way too long and there was too much filler on it. Now Load, the original Load album, was pretty much in terms of its length, was pretty much as long as they can go, I believe, for a CD, or if it was a record, I don't remember. Pretty much it was as much music as they could possibly fit for whatever media that they were releasing it on. And I believe it was about 3 minutes longer than Reload here. So Reload is still rather long. I believe that 1 hour and 16 minutes in its runtime. So very long still. Even if it's slightly shorter than Load, it's still a very long album. And once again, it suffers from the same major problem as Load, in the fact that it's way too long and there's just way too much filler on it. In fact, I'm really kind of concerned that Metallica would release this as a double album, considering if they had done that, there would even be a lot less. Rather, there'd be a lot more filler and a lot less of just, standout tracks. I heard that Metallica were concerned that some of the tracks from these albums would kind of become forgotten or just kind of lost in the mix if they had released it as a double album. Yet, even when releasing them as single albums, that still kind of happens, to be honest. And in fact, these these two individual albums, if they had been short, if they had cut down a lot of these filler tracks and they had been put together, the best tracks from each one, I think we would have gotten a better album as a whole, in my opinion. Metallica's greatest flaw here during the Load and Reload era of their band, I guess, was that their just inability to kind of forget some tracks and just leave them as leftovers or just B-sides to be released later on or something like that. These albums, Load was 14 tracks, this one is 13 tracks. Each one is over an hour long. Put the two together, you have almost a 3-hour long album. Stuff could be cut down. I don't think anyone can make the argument that that's not true. However, Reload, I believe, is between these two albums the worst of the two, because overall I just think a lot more of the tracks on this one are forgettable and just kind of more leftover-like, I guess you could say. It feels more like Metallica put more of the best tracks on Load as kind of being the first album that they were going to release, and they put more of the leftovers here on Reload, with the exception of a few single tracks and things of that sort. Obviously, they get the album some radio play and things like that. But overall, much of these tracks just seem very forgettable and just almost leftover-like, and definitely it doesn't feel like you're listening to an album, like a brand new studio album at times. At times it feels more like you're listening to a collection of leftover tracks or a collection of B-sides with a few singles thrown in there, which, many people I've heard believe that this is just a collection of Load leftovers, which isn't entirely true, because these were just not chosen to be on Load, they were saved for a later time, so they're not exactly leftovers, but, it feels like that when you're listening to it. That doesn't mean that there aren't some enjoyable tracks on this project, however. The opening track, Fuel, which is just, a staple on rock radio still nowadays, even though it's been 20 years since this album's release pretty much. I still hear it all the time on the radio. I still hear it in car commercials. So it's still a song that has some staying power to it. And I can see why. It's a very enjoyable song. Lyrically, it's nothing special or anything of that sort, and overall, it's not the most interesting Metallica song by any means, but it has a certain energy to it that, just gets you hooked and gets you pumped up when you're listening to it. It's an enjoyable song, not one of Metallica's best, but it's definitely something that, kicks off the album in a good direction, I guess you could say. And the follow-up track, The Memory Remains, is arguably a very interesting track. The track begins as more of a bluesy, sort of groovy, hard rock type of track that is enjoyable, definitely more single leaning in terms of its direction, definitely was looking for some radio play. Yet there's one aspect of this track that sticks out like a sore thumb, and that is kind of the feature that's provided on it, which is, hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Marian Faithfull, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, please comment down below how to do so, because I don't want to embarrass myself any further. Her vocal parts are just really weird, in my opinion. She's just kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It just doesn't exactly mesh with Metallica or this track at all, in my opinion. It just feels like they were going for something somewhat experimental here, but it just kind of fell flat on its face, and it just kind of stands out as being, like I said earlier, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb on this track that otherwise is very, kind of a more safe-sounding track, more single-like, something that could get played on the radio, but this part is definitely a bit weird. I still enjoy the track, however. I can kind of look past this kind of awkward sounding feature part, and the rest of the song still sounds good in my opinion. Another one of the better tracks here is the Unforgiven 2, a sequel to the song The Unforgiven from their album, the Black Album. And this one changes things up a bit. It starts off with the same horn kind of sound that was on the first track, but lyrically here it feels more like, lyrically he's talking more about a relationship as opposed to kind of just society as a whole kind of, beating him down. Instead, it's a relationship that he's kind of having issues with. So we kind of changed up the lyrics to be in a different situation, yet kind of have the similar theme to them, which kind of is the reoccurring concept with these Unforgiven tracks. It's not the last time Metallica would release an Unforgiven song, and they all kind of have the same general theme to them, yet they kind of have different sort of, I guess you could say, self-contained stories to them, if that makes any sense at all. Instrumentally, I think the song is definitely different than the first Unforgiven track, whereas the first Unforgiven song had very kind of loud verses that were kind of more in your face and really soft choruses. This one goes for a more typical song structure where the verses are a bit softer and the chorus gets a bit more intense. It's a more of a ballad-like track as a whole, and I think it's an enjoyable one, to be honest. Might be my least favorite out of all the Unforgiven tracks, but it's still an enjoyable part of the track listing, and it's one of the better ballad songs Metallica have on this album. There are also some somewhat underrated tracks here in the track listing, like Devil's Dance, which comes up at the beginning of this album. I like the intro to this track. It just has a bit of an aggressive sound to it. And then the track Slither, which also has a really kind of catchy chorus to it, which I found myself enjoying. Tracks like these are some of the hidden gems here in the track listing, and are just kind of underrated in Metallica's discography as a whole. I believe Slither hasn't even been played live before, which is a bit interesting because I think it's one of the more enjoyable tracks here, but maybe I'm alone in that thought. The rest of the tracks on this album just, don't exactly interest me all that much. They're not bad by any means, kind of like some of the filler kind of tracks on Load, but they don't really stand out to me in any way. And I can't help but notice certain comparisons between this one album and Load. I mean, that's to be expected given that, the history behind them. But, in terms of the track listing and some of the tracks themselves, in Load, my review for Load, I also mentioned how some of my favorite tracks were all at the beginning of the album, and once again, that's kind of how it worked out here. Maybe not quite as many tracks, but still, it's kind of how it worked out. And once again, Load had two rather long songs on it, kind of going past 6 minutes in length. Here we have two more long tracks, Low Man's Lyric and Fixer, that come at the end of this album. And, once again, I have to wonder to myself, is there a reason why on both albums we got two rather long tracks, and is there a reason why the tracks at the beginning of each album seem to be a bit better than the rest? I don't know. Maybe that's just my thoughts on it. Maybe it's just because I happen to like the tracks at the beginning of each of these albums more. Maybe I was just a bit more attentive when listening to these albums more at the beginning because the albums were just starting up before it just kind of started to blur together a bit more. I don't know, to be honest, but I think it's rather interesting how that worked out. So overall, Reload is by no means a bad album, to be honest. It just feels like a rather lackluster album. A lot of the tracks here, like I said before, feel like leftovers and just tracks that are almost throwaway. Most of the tracks here that I think are of higher quality comes towards the beginning of the album, or some of the singles and things of that sort, but there are still some underrated gems here in the track listing like there was on the original Load album. I kind of want to repeat my sentiment that I said earlier, how if you took the best tracks from each album, put them together, you'd have a decent project overall, as opposed to kind of two, average projects that have a lot of filler with them. And, kind of to keep up with that thought, I'm going to create a Spotify playlist of my favorite tracks from each album, kind of put them together in the order I would like, so you can listen to my Load, Reload, Frankenstein monster of a playlist if you wanted to. That's going to be linked down in the description below, so you could check that out if you want, because, and once again, that's just my thoughts on the playlist. You could have your own favorite tracks from these albums that are different than mine, but overall, Reload is just average. It doesn't do anything really new for Metallica. I mean, the sound of Load was a bit of a new direction, but Reload doesn't change that sound at all, and overall, it's just overshadowed by Load the first half, really, that overall I think had some better tracks on it compared to Reload, even though that album still wasn't perfect on its own. And I think I'm just going to cut myself off there before I start rambling. If you enjoyed this review, I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on those future Metallica reviews, which should be coming out in the near future. Make sure you check out those older Metallica reviews because, it's Metallica. Comment down below your thoughts on this album. What do you think about Reload, especially compared to Load? Which one do you prefer? I'd like to know personally, considering that Load and Reload are some of the more controversial, some of the more talked about albums in Metallica's discography concerning the quality of the albums. And don't forget to check out that Spotify playlist that I was talking about before, which should be linked down in the description as well. Share your thoughts on my picks for the songs as well down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and stay golden.